Hey, welcome everyone to today's webinar. So kind of in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, it's had a lot of devastating impact on people's lives. It's hurt economies both locally and globally. However, for kind of enterprising restoration companies, there's a bit of a niche market for those of the companies that are willing to adapt. So making sure that your sales process is as sharp as possible allows you to capitalize on either individual projects or long-term contracts throughout this time. And asserting yourself as the professional vendor of choice that's properly and professionally equipped to handle this crisis is huge. So done correctly, restoration companies providing COVID-19 disinfection services have the opportunity to change the tides in getting our economy back to work and back on track. So to that end, I'm very pleased to introduce our expert panelist, Jeff Carrier. He's the Marketing Director of Restoration Digital Marketing. He's got over a decade of experience as a marketing director and many other years as a guy who's done a lot of sales and hired a bunch of salespeople. So in his spare time, he also co-hosts a fantasy football podcast called NFL Talking Heads. So you can you hit him up later on if you want to get your NFL fix as things aren't live currently. And he also is the co-founder of a software called RestorationERP. So we'll talk about that in just a minute.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the introduction, Zach. Thanks for the plug on the fantasy podcast. I didn't expect that, but we all like to have little hobbies on the side, and that's definitely one of mine to keep me busy.
Absolutely. Cool. Mine are way less boring or maybe way less exciting, so I'm not going to get into those. For those joining here, my name is Zach Johnson. I'm from KnowHow, and so KnowHow is all about making it super easy for team members to instantly access all of your processes from any device. So today we're going to be going over a sales process, but make sure to check out some of our COVID-19 processes as well as operation safety and management. To that end, we'll get started here right away. Before we start, I just want to thank our industry partners. So I want to say thanks to Business Mentors, thanks to Ask Amy Instant Estimate Review, thanks to the Restoration Lawyer, and thanks to Business Development Associates. So we'll just kick things off here. The big, I think, maybe fun kickoff question for Jeff is, what's one of your most memorable or unlikely sales stories?
Well, one of them I have that's a little more in the customer service, which we know the sales processes from beginning to end. You want repeat customers. We did, the restoration company did a project where they had the house too warm for a goldfish and killed the goldfish and was required from the homeowners to go out and bury it and do a little ceremony thing. And our lead technician did a great job, executed that, made them happy, and everyone was satisfied under the circumstances. So hopefully that's one of the ones that can't always comes to mind in terms of telling restoration stories.
That's great. He could put like aquatics eulogy specialist on his LinkedIn after that.
Yeah, he can. Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, hey, we'll probably bounce into a couple of other stories as we continue here, but we'll just kind of continue with some of the questions here. So the first question is, the big one that's really is in your wheelhouse is, what are some of the things that you do to select like an ace salesperson?
Yeah, salespeople is very difficult to find, especially I think even more so in the restoration industry, where it's a process of, breaking down those entry doors, but also building a relationship and then continuing to follow up, because there isn't a traditional, introduction. You sell a specific item, and then they can come back with, a work order. But one of the things I really look for in terms of hiring a salesperson is their ability to be comfortable with rejection and their ability to be outgoing and work after hours. So there's certain things that we've implemented where after hours seems to be a great way to do relationship building once you've kind of broken down that entry barrier. But not everyone's willing to do that, has a capability of doing it. If they have family or life, etc., under the circumstances. but that proves to be very successful in restoration. So that's one of the things we look for. Do they have the ability to do that? And are they comfortable with rejection and continuously going back? I think that's needed for all salespeople.
Cool. Do you have any particular like interview questions that you like to ask to screen kind of top candidates?
You know, I all the ones that you would find online, I'd like to ask certain things about, you know, how they handled a customer at a previous job leaving them. You know, what things did they do to try and retain them? What things did they do when they were initially told no and then won over a customer? Can they tell me those stories? Because if a salesperson has done that in the past, you know, they should be able to draw from those experiences and give you a couple examples that would give you that kind of indication that, okay, they've been in a specific scenario where someone told them no 2, 3, 4 times, and they found a way to ask the right questions, open-ended questions, which I love to do, and is one of the things that we do, to go ahead and basically, you know, turn that customer into a no into a yes.
Cool. So I guess what I'm hearing is it's really important to be able to say, not just tell me the volume of things you've sold. They're not going to give you a number, but tell me specifically how you've overcome.
100%. Yeah. Because every industry that you're in is really hard to relate, you know, how many cars you sold to working for, you know, a retail company or et cetera. But it's really about dealing with the rejection and overcoming that. Because if you get someone who's hungry and can keep going back to that person and follow a process that you should be instilling in them, you know, during the training process, and some of the things that, you know, that you guys have, then they can follow that process to a T and have more success versus, you know, the numbers that they might throw at you during an interview.
Gotcha. So I guess, again, to those listening, one of the really important things is to actually, even though maybe it sounds a little bit tedious, but to pick apart and say, hey, can you tell me about a time where you've solved like a hard objection, and be wary of someone who goes, I can't remember.
100%. And also how, you know, what did you do after you lost a client, you know, and why did you lose that client? Is there a client example that you lost and that you were able to gain back? Those are all questions that are very significant in terms of the sales process. That's very indicative in terms of how they handle the client themselves and just the execution itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's so the best indication of future behavior is past behavior.
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. So I guess for after you select somebody, maybe if you don't mind giving us a quick overview of what your training process looks like.
I think there's 3 things that you really want to do when you're hiring someone. You want to have a written out process that you are following. You know, if you're going after insurance agents, if you're going after commercial properties, you know, that's one of the reasons why we created RestorationERP. If you're going and putting in disaster plans, well, what does that intro conversation look like? What does a presentation look like? What does, you know, your walkthrough look like? What do those steps look like? So that way your salesperson can follow that consistently and increase their success versus saying, hey, I just ran out and I went and talked to so-and-so without a true mission and process in place. So you really want to have your processes down. You also absolutely have to do ride-alongs. You have to do ride-alongs. And one of the things that I see that sometimes is a shortfall to restoration owners and hiring successful salespeople is that they're the sales manager, but the owner is extremely busy. So what ends up happening is some of these items, like a ride-along, gets kind of lost in the shuffle. And with the ride-along, you're finding a lot about your salesperson. You know, are they comfortable walking into a place for the first time? You know, cold walk-in, cold call. Are they able to successfully find the decision maker? You know, are they asking the right questions for the process that you put in? It's one thing to give them the piece of paper and the sheet and your process, but are they actually executing while you're out there? You can find an enormous amount of information about them, how they handle themselves, walking into a facility? Do they run basically back out as soon as someone tells them no? There's tremendous red flags that you can find if you're not doing the ride along. So that's number two. And then number three is you need a way to basically evaluate their process. This is the biggest challenge in the restoration industry. As I mentioned earlier, we don't get a work order. We just sold X amount of square feet of flooring. So what ends up happening in the restoration industry, a lot of owners hear back from their salesperson, I had a great lunch, I had a great meeting, they're going to give us their next, water job, and nothing materializes out of it. And you hear a lot of that and nothing materializes out of it. So one of the things that I've done is I created something called a quality touch score. And anyone can do this, which is basically what type of touches are you having while you're going out and doing your sales calls, meetings, lunches, etc. What are we doing to have more, better types of touches? For example, a phone call is better than an email, but a lunch is better than a phone call. But, hanging out for dinner is better than all of those. So what we did is in our CRM, we would just, we would categorize each of these touches. And then at the end of the month, we would assign a point value to them. And at the end of the month, you have to have 120 points. That's, our benchmark that we set. And in order for part of your evaluation process, what we found is obviously that more calls equals meetings and more meetings equals sales. Well, if we're not having enough of the beginning part quality touches, then we're not going to get enough sales. And so there was a strong correlation there of us hitting our benchmark on quality touches that end up resulting in sales. And so we came up with that process and philosophy with managing, training, and evaluating the progress that our salespeople were making out in the field.
Cool. So that there's this like cascading effect where they become more comfortable by just having multiple touch points, and that relationship is strengthened then.
Absolutely. And, it also provides them guidance in terms of how much more they need to be, out there doing. If you have what your quote unquote sales number is, that, I need, X amount of 20% more before the end of the month, and you might be driving. While this is not sales, this is the touches that we need to turn into sales. So if they know that in the middle of the second week, they really need to get, more points, in our quality touch score, then they're going to be really going out and trying to get those lunches, get those ERP meetings, get those dinners, depending on your person and what you give them, allowance to do. But of course, you need to equip your salesperson with these, with that freedom and ability, instead of just sending them off.
Cool. So you've got some pretty cool water cooler talk then, with like your sales guys are like, hey, so did you go for dinner? And they're like, did you get your 5 points there? And did you check up with so-and-so about their kids?
Yeah, absolutely. And we try and go over it on a weekly basis. So again, everyone's up to date on a weekly scenario. So that way there's no surprises at the end of the month. Hey, you didn't reach your goal of 120 points. It's done on a weekly basis. And then you discuss what those touch points are. Of course. Yeah. Well, I was during dinner. I discovered this and so on and so forth. So it's a great way for them to really force themselves, because what we also found before kind of implementing this, and even depending on the person, is they might call and leave a voicemail one week, right? And then you sit at your weekly meeting, and then you ask them, well, what's going on with so-and-so account? Well, I left a voicemail last week. Well, that was last week. That's a long time to wait for someone who gets bombarded with a lot of phone calls to just pick up the next week and hope that you get them. I mean, you're starting from square one the following week, right? So it forces them to every other day make a call, force them to basically accelerate their process if they're comfortable doing that, and you're going to find that when you do your ride-alongs, and you're going to see that in the data for the quality touch score. You only did 12 calls this whole month. Why is that? And so you can have those strong conversations with better data too, as you're managing them. It really turns into, well, why didn't you hit this number versus why aren't we getting sales?
Gotcha. Right. So you actually take and really put focus on the actionable steps, not the kind of ambiguous scenario of why didn't you book it?
Yeah. Well, so-and-so told me they're going to get a water loss, and I guess they haven't had one yet. those are conversations that about every restoration company right now I know has heard from their salesperson. And you flip the script, you say, you didn't do 120 points, you had 2 lunches last month, why is that? And it's much more about those actionable insights, as you mentioned, because those actions, again, calls plus meetings, is going to turn into sales.
Gotcha. So we actually just have a question pop up here from one of the viewers. So the question is, as a new salesperson who's also new to the industry, do you have any tips for me? I've noticed starting out with questions helps. It also helps me determine if they're worth my time, but do you have any advice?
I think one of the things that you need to get is you need to get a really good list of objections that you're going to run into. So one of the things that we had when we did our meetings is we had all the objections that you overcome. For example, if you're walking into a commercial facility and they say, "Oh, well, you guys cost too much." Well, there's a lot of ways to handle that objection, right? There is a lot of people might run into, well, we use industry standard pricing, and they just go off and they run with that because a lot of restoration companies use Xactimate. But what you really want to do is you really want to have everything with the open-ended question, because we don't know what they mean by that, right? It's just something that they say. A lot of these objections are just off the cuff that these people are familiar with saying. So what I train is say, well, compared to what? Because compared to a restoration company, well, then we can dissect that issue, which is, well, no, in theory, our equipment should cost this, and you guys should be in line with other restoration companies for the most part. And so you can attack that no very differently than, well, you guys cost too much. We have our own in-house people. Whoa, that's a totally different objection. Okay, you guys have your own in-house sales maintenance people that sucks up water and dries. Do you guys have enough drying equipment? Do you guys run into a scenario where you have, you have the water taken up, you're removing the damaged material, but you don't have enough drying equipment? Oftentimes that is the case. You deal with a large organization, they're going to want to do the tear out and maybe in the build back, and then you can interject yourself as just a drying company, which is really where all restoration companies make money anyways. But now what we've done is we've identified that you guys cost too much, is either, compared to restoration companies, or they actually like to do it in-house, and that presents totally different strategy of moving forward. Or, they say, no, we don't use companies like yours. Okay, why is that? Because they have a vendor process. What does a vendor process look like? So I would say getting back to that question, get a list of these objections and have open-ended questions to them.
Gotcha. So you're actually it's a bit of a Navy SEALs training almost. You're putting your salespeople through the worst objections you can think of, and you're prepping them for how to handle.
100%. I mean, I don't know about Navy SEALs, but what you are doing, with that training is you're saying you're going to run into these questions that we're going to hear all the time, and here's how to handle it. Because if this person is new, he or she is new to the industry, they're not going to be used to handling some of these objections. They're not going to have the rebuttal, at the tip of their tongue. So I would get a list down, make sure you're properly prepared, review them, maybe even have them with you to some degree. And then that way, when this person's out there and they're speaking to them about, to an insurance agent, a plumber, facility manager, whoever, they're going to be better prepared for those objections for sure. And I would also say, let's have a strategy in place. So going up to a facility director and just asking him for the next water job is near impossible these days. So what's your strategy outside of just that? That's why people do disaster planning. What's your strategy with insurance agents? We turn to doing after hours events. So we're not bugging them all the time in the office. And of course, during this time, everything is a bit different. So I'm referring to a lot of, pre-COVID, but have a strategy in place. So you're not only going in there and only asking for work.
Gotcha. And so that actually, does that tie into your point system then for points of contact?
Yeah, because you're going to have, so one of those 3 things I mentioned in terms of training is having a strategy and process in place. Then you do your ride-alongs to make sure they're executing the process. And then you do your quality touch score to measure that strategy and that process. So one of ours, for example, is we do 12 social events every year. And so, the more people that attend a social event, that's going to be better for your quality touch score, of course. So we do fun little things back in the day when fun little things happened all the time, even like zip lining. Even if it's just 4 people to zip lining, that point valuation there is super high because that relationship there is strong. And again, we measure. So we saw a 75% of the people that attended our social events actually had referred us in the previous 12 months.
Wow, that's incredibly high.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to have someone who doesn't like you attend a social event, right? Especially on weekends or after hours, and these are outside of business hours. So it makes sense. And you don't need a lot of people to attend these things. So you can have a small budget. You can do 4 to 10 people per event, and you're going to get a strong correlation that's going to end up turning into sales.
Gotcha. Do you have any metrics perchance on this inputting these, that what is it, you called it a quality social score?
Quality touch score.
It's quality touch score. So after you implemented that, do you have any metrics on kind of how sales changed at all?
Yeah. Well, I don't have them necessarily off the top of my head. I'm a little removed from that with the other positions, as you mentioned, that I'm doing. But there was, what we saw a better correlation of was the success of the salesperson and the completion of that benchmark, right? So we're talking about having a successful salesperson. What we saw was an almost complete correlation of, if they can hit those benchmarks, they're successful. They stayed with the company. They brought in, a tremendous amount of sales. If they could never hit them, they were generally unsuccessful.
So if you had maybe give a piece of advice to someone who is trying to implement maybe even a version of this quality touch score, and maybe just a couple things they could do to start moving in that direction.
The first thing you want to do is have a CRM. So most people should probably have that already. So that's a good start. And then what you want to do is you want to input every single touch that you do. So when you go out, and you do your calls, or if you're in the office, you're out on the road, whatever it might be, you're doing your Zoom calls, input every single one of those. It should take it should take a minute per entry. So it shouldn't be overly difficult. This is also a great way for the salesperson to show to their superior, what they're doing on a daily basis. So I would put those in. And then once you have that information, you could probably export the data, see all of your individual touch points by type. Hopefully you can put it in by type: email, phone, Zoom call, ERP meeting, lunch, social event. And then you can put it into, an Excel sheet and actually pull out, different data on it, charts, if you really want to get that crazy, which is stuff that I love to do. But that would be the progress that you could take. Any restoration company and salesperson could do easily.
Cool. That's great. So we've got a question to that end from a viewer here. And the question is, so in this age of COVID, what are people doing to get inside offices, or maybe do touch points with companies that are either working from home or don't want, quote unquote, strangers inside their office?
Yeah, and every area is going to be completely different, right? So that's something to definitely keep in mind of. We're all getting a lot more comfortable with Zoom calls. So that's obviously one that you can do. But what's the strategy of the Zoom call? Going back to that, we don't want to just pop in and say, hey, you want to just join for Zoom call unless you're a friend. So have a strategy behind the purpose of it. I think that if you're going out to commercial, something like a disaster preparedness plan makes a lot of sense during this time, right? A lot of people are going through a disaster, maybe not restoration related, but the being prepared is at the top of mind right now, right? This is a financial issue for a lot of people that have been closed, and a health issue, but being prepared is important. So I think after going after commercial facilities, you can easily do Zoom calls to introduce a disaster ERP type plan. I think that's a good strategy. With other ones, there's actually companies starting out. I was just presented and shown a virtual breakout room. Those escape rooms that you do.
Yeah.
There's a virtual one out there. So again, going back to that social event, so we're thinking of different ways to interact with, again, our clients that we can't go in the office. Well, here's one good example. And so that's one of the things that, the restoration company is looking at doing.
Cool. So it could be more complex or maybe more interesting other than just like, hey, let's grab a drink and hop on a Zoom call.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, if there are some places that you can still get out to because your location is, maybe not one of these hot spots, then a lot of people aren't in the office. You're not going in the office. Well, guess what? Now's your chance to do more of these social events. Even if it is social distancing and with masks, it's going to feel a little different. But, we're still doing a couple of those, real tiny, real small, because our area is open at 50% for restaurants and breweries. But if you have that capability, you could still move, get outside the box of thinking I have to go into their office and try and get them to come out.
Cool. Awesome. And I guess everyone's got a point of rapport if you're just commenting on what's on other people's masks.
Yeah. That's always a good icebreaker for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Another question here. What CRM would you recommend using?
One of them that we use that probably no one's really heard of is called Pipeline Deals. It is really good about tracking the pipeline of a deal, which you can set up, for example, you're not doing a sales process, again, like going back to flooring, but if you did an ERP process, you can easily track made the introduction, made the presentation, signed the agreement. So you can track the progress of that and see if it's closed, not closed, see your percentages there. But you can do the same thing with, say you come out with a strategy on doing these social events. You made the introduction to an agent or so on and so forth. Did you get them out or not? The other thing is it tracks the types really well. So you can make any type of type you want. Type of touch point is what I'm trying to get at inside Pipeline Deals. So Pipeline Deals is one. I know Luxor is big in the industry. I never really utilized it, but it looked really good as well. So.
Okay. And that's Pipeline Deals, not Pipe Drive, because that's another.
Right. I believe so. Yeah. It's a different one. Yeah.
Cool. Gotcha. So actually, maybe we'll just segue slightly here, but be in the kind of in the same realm. You're the co-founder of a software called RestorationERP. Do you mind maybe actually speaking to that for a minute?
Yeah. So a common strategy in the restoration industry to go after commercial work is setting up a disaster preparedness plan for them. It's a business continuity plan where they prepare in the event of an emergency. And it could be fire and water restoration related, but it could be IT data breach related. And every facility should have something like this in place, but the truth is mostly don't. So large companies, you think of ServPro, they have their app and plan. Belfour's made a living off of this. So what we did was we created a tool that basically allows them to bring that process online, compete at some of the bigger levels for these independent companies. So they import this information online. So it's easily accessible 24/7 from the end client, your hotel, the commercial property manager, and also the restoration client. So the strategy there is instead of going up to the facility director and saying, hey, I'd love to have a lunch. We're a water company. We suck up water. You probably had some of those. Can I get a meeting with you? And it's really hard. I know I've done that down a lot, but it's really hard because these facility directors are used to working with restoration companies a lot, especially if they have a larger facility. Now your approach, again, your approach and your strategy is, hey, facility director of XYZ hotel, we implement disaster preparedness plans for other hotels in the area like Hilton and Marriott at no cost to yourself. Would you be interested? And just that elevator pitch is so different in terms of you're starting that implementation of getting their attention. So typically they're interested enough to ask a few questions. And then you get a meeting with them where you actually showcase what that process looks like. And that process is doing a walkthrough of their facility, collecting information on their vendors, and typically is done in the past with paper and binder. And you put all this information together and you hand it to them. And it's a really good relationship building process because during that, there's a ton of touch points. You have the intro, you have the presentation, you have a minimum one walkthrough, you have data collection, potentially an ERP onboarding thing with their facility techs. So it's a tremendous strategy for getting commercial work. And we saw that with the restoration company here in North Carolina. But after that process, if you're using paper binder, it kind of stops it's hard to update the information. The binder's stuck on a shelf. With RestorationERP, it's uploaded to the cloud. They can access it wherever they want. They can access any vendor. And again, the strategy is they need to have a business continuity plan in place. So if you don't have one, what are you doing? Are you choosing not to do anything, Mr. Facility Director? Or are you interested in using, our free platform that we're offering to you? And then in return, this is the big thing for the restoration company, is they get an agreement that says we're your go-to restoration company. We call you for all disasters. And that's really what you're providing value to them with the online disaster plan. And then in return, they're guaranteeing you future commercial work.
Cool. So anybody who's interested in getting more information on that, just make sure that you actually just put your information in the chat, and we'll send out an email at the end of the webinar here with a link to that.
Cool, yeah.
Great. So out of curiosity here, we get another question. And this is kind of related to what we were talking about earlier. So when you've got salespeople that you're training, sometimes I think in a commercial perspective, it's hard to determine who pulls the trigger, who's the decision maker. So how do you go about training people to kind of identify that person and do touch points with them?
I think this is relatively easy. It's just a matter of asking, and maybe asking the right question, but it's a matter of asking. You just ask them, if something happens in the middle of the night, the sprinkler head goes off, you need to call a restoration company. Who is doing that? Who is making that phone call? And you might get something where there's different people involved, but typically I always like to start at the top. Usually it's a facility director, an engineer. Sometimes they call them a little bit differently. We've always implemented disaster plans. So I always like to go in with the idea of, who would be responsible for making the decision and using those specific words to X, Y, Z. And you should get a pretty clear answer. That's not me. That's Johnny over at engineering. And then you just simply ask, great, how can I get a hold of him? What's his best contact information?
Cool. Do you have any tactics for if you're handling kind of a group of people that's making the decision, that a kind of an equal decision-making power as opposed to one person?
Yeah, you're always going to find that there's one person that really pulls the weight for the most part. But what you want to do is you definitely want to get them all together. So if they say, well, that's probably me and someone else, especially if you're putting in like a larger plan in place with them where it might cross departments. So there's a couple people and you say, great, would you be able to set up a meeting with you and so-and-so who's the other decision maker? And you kind of put it on them. Would you be able to do that? And, if they're talking to you, then usually that they're pretty open to it. Sometimes they'll tell you, well, go talk to them, see if they're interested. But I would try and get them in the same room at the same time while you're doing your sales pitch.
Cool, great.
What you're going to find there too is you're going to find everyone has a little bit of a different need, right? Someone in housekeeping might have a different need than someone in engineering, for example. So when you get that opportunity with them is you want to really make sure what are their pain points, what are the issues that you've had before with dealing with a restoration company? What were their strengths and benefits? What did you like about them? What did you not like about them? And this goes back to having that sheet of these open-ended questions. When you set up a sales presentation meeting, you're meeting this company for the first time, you just want to basically interview them. They're going to give you the information that you need. If you start going in there and machine gun, all of these things that you guys do so great, they're going to miss the point on what is actually important to them, because they're going to have very specific things: turnaround time, price. Those are two different things. You don't want to be spending time on price when they care about turnaround time because they have 105%, booking at their hotel. And there's other items there that might be a pain point to them. Getting a hold of someone 24/7. So making sure you ask those open-ended questions is extremely important. Now, literally have them on a sheet with me during the interview, literally making notes, and then say, is it okay if I take notes? You take your notes. It shows that you're paying attention to them, and then follow up that meeting with an actual brief description, synopsis of that meeting, showing that you paid attention. You said that this was important, facility director, about, turnaround time. Well, I responded with that we have this X amount of crews, available 24/7. We're, 30-minute response. And so you're kind of answering their pain points, and you're letting them basically sell themselves.
So really hitting the need, like being really clear on that.
Yep. And you can only get the need if you're only asking these open-ended questions.
Could you maybe just throw out a couple of examples of a good open-ended question that you've used or trained?
I do have a sheet, so if anyone does want to reach out, or I can send it to you, Zach, and we can connect people with a sheet of these really good open-ended questions. A lot of times I like to ask, have they used a restoration company in the past? What that experience was like. If you had a sprinkler head break in the middle of the night, what are you doing? I like to know that process. Do they have a company already, or do they not? Well, I don't know. I'll find someone, or I go online, or I go in Yellow Pages. So that's an important, to figuring out, do they already have someone or not? I like to start with that sprinkler question. And then what has been their previous damages as well. I like to discover what that is as well. Is it something that's common, uncommon? So those are ones. And then a lot of times you're going to get a little bit of rejection. Like the price is a great one to say, compared to what. And then they might have a vendor process that you can ask some other questions for. So, but I'm happy to provide a more extensive sheet on that.
Cool. Yeah. So, I think most people are pretty familiar with the difference, but just as a quick overview, like an open-ended question is, what's your favorite color? Or can you tell me what your favorite color, as opposed to saying, do you like black or white?
Right.
Cool. Okay. And that allows the client to actually really illuminate and take you down a path that maybe you couldn't have seen if you just asked something that was
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Awesome. We had another question here that pop up. Are you seeing a shift away from insurance agents as the decision makers for residential sales?
So we have seen a shift in terms of a 10-year span. Yeah. What ends up happening recently is deductibles have gone up. And so the people are basically getting more quotes. They're going more upstream, what I would call upstream. They're going online. They're going direct to the source. So either going online looking for a restoration company, or they're getting a plumber out there, or the insurance company says this might not be covered. So even if they started with the insurance company to start with, they're getting pushed back in terms of going back to online, plumber, figure it out yourself. I still think that you can get value out of the insurance agent market. I know we do. Again, we primarily do social events and stuff that's not necessarily, it's 100% about walking in their door and dropping off something to remind them about. It's actually about building the relationship, which you can do outside of work. So there is a shift. I do still see value in going after insurance agents, which is why I think it's really important for everyone in every insurance company, restoration company, to try and be at the intersection of every decision-making process of the homeowner. They find a pipe leak. There's a lot of different areas they can go. They can call a plumber. They can go online. They can call their insurance company. Ideally, you're in all three of those segments and trying to diversify where your sales are coming from.
Cool. Awesome. Next question here. When you're doing kind of training around the quality touch score and rapport, how are you training people to uncover some of the connections to build rapport?
So with rapport, you're really trying to find out what's important to them. Again, a facilities person is completely different than an insurance agent. And so you should also be speaking to them very differently. The commercial person is typically going to be a lot more direct to the point, a lot more business related. You're not going to be able to go in there and, swing this person for an after hours event right off the bat, or maybe never, because they're more concerned about the business relationship and their responsibility to the facility. And with that comes a different tone. That person might not be an overly friendly in the office type person. And if you go in there with the same insurance agent, bubbly, fun, outgoing type of environment that usually you see with an actual insurance agent versus a facilities director or engineers manager, you're not going to have the same results. It's going to be kind of mixed, if that kind of makes sense. So you need to understand what type of person they are in their position and what their responsibilities are. And so that way you can kind of cater yourself as a salesperson. And again, I think that those are two big contrasts. With insurance, you want to go in there, you want to have fun, they want to have fun. And I'm using this as a broad example. They're much more apt to do these social things. They're much more apt to do these luncheons in their office. Facilities, it's work. That's why I think something like the ERP disaster planning works. You're providing them value. If you're there spending their time, they want to know that you're bringing them value. There's a purpose to the meeting, stuff like that. It's a much different approach.
Gotcha. A little harder to invite them to a fantasy football team or something.
Yeah, definitely not right off the bat for sure. 100%. Yeah. So and if you keep that in mind, I think that you'll see a little bit of a different tone when you're speaking to them. You'll see a little bit different when it comes to objections and rejection.
Cool. Do you have a memorable experience of connecting at one of these social events with anybody?
We do something where we rent out the clubhouse every year at the local minor league baseball team, which is always just a great time to connect with people. We also set up an agreement and a relationship with the casino in town, and they have concerts. And the same way that you might ask your buddy who works at a place, like, hey, can you hook him up with some tickets? Was that relationship I had with that person who was a client who had built over years, that started with an ERP. So that's the example of one that you grow into and was always nice.
Cool. So yeah, there's definitely that, if you have an environment that is not super work related, it facilitates a connection probably faster than if you are, sitting in front of them. But you need to decide when and where to do that.
Right. Yeah. I think what people need to remember is at the beginning part of the relationship, it's very much, somewhat it's business, it's value add. What can you do to them? You follow these processes and strategies that we've talked about. And then that allows you to get your foot in the door, allow you to actually have these quality touch points. And then afterwards, hopefully you can expand that relationship to a more organic level.
Cool. And you alluded to this a little earlier, based on the fact that you might have a hotel that needs high turnaround time, and some people care about price and people don't, or at least they have things that are more important on their list than price. What project details are the most important to align on with the client?
Yeah, I think that really comes from the client again. I think if you really get comfortable and get in the habit of asking them those types of questions and that question, you're going to find your job a lot easier. For example, we work with several commercial facilities that they want to do all the tear out and they want to do the build back. They just want to stay for the equipment. Sure, no problem. We could do that for you. Sometimes we come in with the idea that since we're there, they want us to do A to Z just because we're a licensed general contractor, so we can. So it's really important to understand the important project details that are important to them. Do you need us to stuff this room with more equipment than is necessary? Because, my example of a hotel, that's an actual example. Every time we did work at this hotel, they were 105% booked. So you guys don't want to be 100% booked. But the way the industry works is they always have to account for cancellations and so forth. So they needed every room every single night. And so what was important for them was the room, not the price. And so we go about attacking that project differently because we know they need the room, not necessarily, skimping on price.
So the whole direction of the relationship in the sale is actually emphasizing that you understand that aspect.
Right. And they're telling you, exactly what they need, and hopefully you can gear your project to meet those needs. And especially on the commercial side, you're going to have a lot of success on that end. And the same way with homeowners. Homeowners might be a lot more on the price side, right? So if it's not covered by insurance, then it's going to be probably very on price. If it is covered by insurance, then you have an education thing scenario there where they might think it's on price, but really they just got to pay the deductible, and then you're going to work with insurance just like every other restoration company. So even with the homeowner, I think if you ask them what's important to them, they should hopefully direct you to that right answer.
Yeah. And so when it is an education sort of objection that comes up, what's some ammunition that you use to help explain that?
Yeah, and I think you guys have it in your process too with the marketing materials. A great way, because they're going to have a lot of questions. A lot of homeowners haven't been through this process before, so they're not aware of what the process looks like. So we have a sheet of what to expect. First thing is we come out and we evaluate, then you have to sign a work authorization, so on and so forth. Here are all the steps that we send. And before we even get out there, we actually have an intro video of what a water damage process looks like. So we're educating them right off the bat with marketing material. And then of course, if you need to educate them on the types of projects that you do, and how they work, then hopefully you have both testimonials and other types of case study examples that you can provide them. So we always found that to be very useful and productive.
Cool. So that you're never walking into a scenario where you don't have the tools or you haven't even pre-educated them.
Right. Yeah. And again, everyone who's been doing this for a while understands the most common objections or questions that you're going to get. So it becomes pretty easy in terms of what you need to create. It's just a matter of creating the content that you have. If you ask any restoration owner, project manager, whatever, they're going to be able to list you the top 5 or 10 things that they basically have to repeat all the time to certain homeowners. How the deductible works, different other types of water projects, timeline, all those things, working with the insurance adjuster.
Do you have a certain process to kind of suss those out before you arrive?
Yeah, I mean, you should have a pretty good call script for your office admin to be able to ask those questions. One of the big things that restoration companies deal with is I've got a foot of water in the basement, and you get out there, it's dry. Right? It just always happens. So having a really good qualification process is important. At the same time, you don't want to overburden them with information. What you're trying to do is qualify the lead and the information. Then you follow it up with some information that they need to know in terms of what to expect during the process, and then have your salespeople, your project estimators equipped with the type of branding and material that's important.
Cool.
To help sell the job.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I guess, we've talked about a number of different things that it's important to come to a sale with, or again, the pre-education side of it. Are there any company details that are important for you to bring to the table or just have prepped?
I think that that's going to be potentially how the restoration process works, your previous job examples, testimonials, because you're going to be trying to sell the job on the site, the best of your ability. So all of these are going to be important once you understand from the decision maker that's on site, are you the one signing the work authorization, right? You don't want to be, selling to someone who's not. And then once you have that decision maker, finding out what's important for them. Luckily, in the restoration world, if it's water and it's standing and it's there, it's an emergency. So there's a little bit of, acceleration, and it helps close that job for you. The time is of the essence. So that really helps restoration companies.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So if you can identify that need, it's obviously useful to make sure you play to that.
Yeah, 100%. Because you might find out that time isn't of the essence for them. It's been an ongoing issue, which happens a lot as well in the restoration industry. You thought it was an emergency, but in reality, it's not. Now you're going to be competing with other companies for an estimate. And so, okay, great. Now you have to backtrack. You're going to have to educate them on how the estimate works. And that's a big thing in the restoration industry too, is these estimates. If you're dealing with pretty much even commercial facilities, they don't like to see an Xactimate estimate. No one knows how to read it, especially homeowners. So, I challenge all restoration companies to consider doing a different on-site estimate that is more conducive to selling the project right then and there. Because once you leave the project site, your percentage of closing at the closing rate goes down. And then you create a very, difficult estimate to read in Xactimate, which takes you a long time to write. So that whole process, getting out there, then having to leave, needs to be better optimized, I think, in the restoration industry itself. So whether you create a little quick Excel spreadsheet, T&M sheet, use a different platform for the initial sales. One of the things that we would do is we would use not to exceed price as an example. That's something else that might be important for someone. Do you want a price that might fluctuate, or can we give you a not to exceed price? Would that make you comfortable for us to start today? It might. So that whole process, I think, is something to consider there, and it could be optimized.
Cool. So that's a great tip, because anytime you leave, you start to slowly slip down their ladder on things that are important in their life.
Yeah. They forget about you. Clearly it wasn't important to do it right then and there. And we're talking about restoration works, which should be, you're hoping to sign it up right then and there when you're on the job site. And if you're not, then you're not competing with time. You throw in a lot of other variables as well. So a lot of people, which you should be looking at, well, what things can I do once I get back to the office to increase my closing rate? How many follow-ups am I doing? Am I leaving a final voicemail? Have I sent them the proper marketing material? Those are all things that you could definitely do, but we should be also optimizing the actual on-site experience that will help close the job right then and there.
So you're a big proponent of, even if you have to take a little time or take a little longer to leave them with a price while you're doing the estimate.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that we actually do. We created a quick, a little speed estimator that we feel comfortable in with the pricing. It's pretty straightforward. It's basically T&M. But what that does is that gives power to our lead technicians to sell the job right then and there. What we want is equipment on site. We're going to make money. I think all restoration companies know that, especially, on water. So as soon as you leave that job site, your sales percentages are going way down.
Gotcha. Yeah. All of a sudden you become less important than like the rerun of Jersey Shore.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great, because I think that sometimes people maybe that are starting out in sales, or even if done it a long period of time or have many years of experience, some of the problem is that any time that you remove yourself from that level of good rapport, the high touch points, naturally people just kind of move you down that level of importance, and then you have to reignite that rapport to close a deal.
Yeah, and it works the same way as I was mentioning earlier with leaving that one voicemail for the facility director, then waiting a whole week to call him back. He doesn't even know your first voicemail. So if you get his voicemail again, well, guess where you are? You're at square one again, because you're not that important to him. So finding that salesperson that can aggressively, follow up. You don't want anyone annoying, but if he's not seeing your voicemail the first time, your second call is basically your first call. And so you don't want to get stuck. We're approaching people who didn't know we existed in terms of these salespeople, and so we really need to be have great follow up, be comfortable with rejection, and that goes back a little bit to what you were saying in terms of following down the importance level. It works the same way if you kind of let it sit there and not follow up correctly with the salespeople for insurance agents, facility directors.
Cool. Yeah. Kind of, this is something we touched on a little bit. It's probably the last question we'll take here. But so I know that you mentioned kind of asking an open-ended question, but if someone gives you a firm no, how do you handle that?
Well, I would go back to what's the no about? No on what? I mean, a no on using our services. And then, you might ask something like, do you not have water damage? And so I want to know what that no is about and dive deeper, because it's often that you're going to get, again, people just throw out no's left and right. But what is it really about? No, because you guys have to go through this. We can only use approved vendors. Oh, okay. You can only use approved vendors. What does that approval process look like? And then they might say, well, that's done through corporate. Okay. Who can I call there? And so we just need to unravel the no, because just a simple no is not enough. So that goes back to having those open-ended questions, objections ready to fire.
Gotcha. And so you kind of dissect the no into a very specific reason, and then you handle that.
And once you do it once or twice, when someone tells you a no on price, when someone just tells you a blanket no, when someone tells you, when someone might say, no, we don't have water damage, and you're inside a 50,000 square foot facility. Oh, okay. I guess I'll move on. There's nothing you could do there. You got a guy who's not interested in talking to you. He's grumpy, whatever. Move on. But at least you didn't just take just the no. No, we already work with someone. Once you go through a couple of those, you're going to have all the open-ended questions ready to fire.
Totally. No, that's great advice, because I think there's a lot of, sometimes there's knee-jerk reaction when someone says no, you go, okay.
Yep. Sure. Absolutely. And if we can just be better prepared, it doesn't look like we're being combative, So one of the things that you want to do is you want to slow the person down. You tell them, okay, I understand. When someone tells me no, typically they mean this. Or when you say price is an issue, or that we cost too much, what do you mean by that? So you want to kind of diffuse the question first. You're not combative right away. And then just diffuse the person and say, okay, when you mean that we cost too much, what do you mean by that? And that helps, because again, it's a knee-jerk reaction from them. And so you don't want to respond in the same way.
Sure. The big thing is to come at it from a perspective of wanting more understanding.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're kind of at time here. So if you're interested in having a process that's very similar to the one that Jeff and I kind of explored today, make sure to just let us know in the chat box and we'll reach out to you. So thank you very much, Jeff. It was great talking to you today. And and for anybody also wanting any more information on Restoration ERP, throw your name in the chat box there, and we'll send out some information. So I hope everybody on today's webinar will join us for our next webinar. So that's Wednesday, July 29th. So that discussion is around how to develop and run a safety program that actual people want to follow, or people actually want to follow, sorry. So we'll throw in, again, that information in an email. And we want to just thank our industry partners really quickly. So if you need a strategy to win during the pandemic, make sure to talk to businessmentors.net. If you don't have any COVID-19 service contracts, talk to the restoration lawyer. If you need an easy way to review your quotes, talk to Ask Amy Instant Estimate Review. If you want to supercharge your marketing and take your business to the next level, make sure to talk to Business Development Associates. So from all of us at KnowHow, thanks very much for joining us.